This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, teambuildr.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week I have an incredibly powerful and unique conversation with veteran law enforcement officer and the woman behind Resilient Heroes, Ellizabeth Pol. Now, what makes this conversation so powerful is as Liz progressed through her career, she started seeing the devastating impact of the mental health crisis on her own profession. Deciding to be part of the solution, she began suicide autopsies, taking a deep dive into all the contributing factors to the officer's suicide. So we discuss a host of topics, from her own journey into law enforcement, her own mental health story, forensic psychology, the psych evals of the first responder professions, canine therapy, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,000 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So that being said, I introduce to you Ellizabeth Pol. Enjoy. Well, Liz, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
I am in rainy/snowy Chicago, Illinois.
I always say this to guests that aren't in Florida. I won't show you what's outside my window because it would make me even more depressed.
It'll hurt my soul.
All right. Well, I would have to start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
So I was born and raised in Chicago. I was born to a Polish American father and a South American Colombian born mother. So my background, ethnicity wise, is pretty mixed. I speak both Spanish and English, and I have one younger sister who's 3 years younger than me.
Brilliant. What did your parents do as far as occupation?
So my mom really, when she first got here, she really worked in the factories in my younger years. And then she just really stayed at home. And my father was kind of involved in personnel. Um, but he died when I was at a very young age.
I'm sorry to hear that. What about the immigration stories that you heard from your mom, and I'm assuming through your mom about your father? Because I think, in some of these current rhetorics that we hear, there's a very kind of anti-immigrant sentiment, and I understand fully between legal and illegal. I get that, but this nation was founded predominantly on immigration. So, what were kind of each of their stories as far as you know?
So my father was born here, so there's really no story behind that. Maybe his parents, but again, he was gone so early on in my life that there's so much of that side that I there's a gap. And then with my mother, most of her family they all migrated over. It was a different time. It wasn't at all like it is that we're seeing today. People were vetted. There was a process, years and years of waiting. I even remember other family members where it just took a long time for paperwork to be filed. Um, and just waiting for a response of that, background checks, all of that kind of stuff. So that's all I really ultimately recall is that there was a whole process and it took some time because I remember cousins that were, a little older. They weren't babies, it took time for them to come over. And, this was back in the 70s, 80s, maybe 90s. So that's kind of all I really recall.
We're seeing the ripple effect of drug prohibition. I had this conversation with a lot of people now. We kind of have this again, this anti-immigrant sentiment sometimes, but then we don't acknowledge the fact that some of the issues in some of these countries were created by us as a consumer in the illicit drug trade. So when I think of Colombia in the 80s and 90s, I'm thinking obviously about a lot of the cocaine and the cartel issues that they had there. Was there any conversation about that? Were they trying to get away from certain areas in Colombia, or was it just purely going to the States for the American dream?
Um, I think it was really just for better opportunity. I actually grew up going back to Colombia just about every single year, as I was a young child. My mom took me for the first time when I was there. She took me for the first time there when I was 9 months old. And I remember going back in my early childhood years up to my teenage years. And it's interesting because in other countries, it's not always this like idea that you get from the media or from what you see on TV. It's really different. So I would travel every year to Colombia, and there wasn't, like people doing lines of cocaine on the corner of every block as people imagine. It like any other country, and my mother's from the capital, from Bogota. It reminded me very much of like any major city like Chicago or anything else where there's like skyscrapers and there's buildings and people going to work and just living normal lives. You have some poorer areas and some richer areas, just like any other city. So it was, for me it was very normal to go back and forth, and I was very much always exposed to different cultures, and we traveled a lot even to other countries. So I mean, everything just, it varies, and everybody has their opinions and their ideas, and yeah.
I think when you travel, you see the world, it
Hmm.
becomes less of an opinion and more of an experience then. But
Exactly.
if you think that you don't like the French people because they didn't stay with you in war, and now you change the name of your French fries to freedom fries, maybe you need to get on a plane and go see the world a little bit.
Yeah, I've learned that mostly on this job, that especially like in areas that I worked here in the city, there are some of the poorest and high uh stats with crime, and there's some very difficult areas. And I've learned, especially through this job, that there's a lot more that people don't really see. I've met so many different people, and not, all over. And I feel like if you don't really travel, if you don't, there's a whole other world other than like the little city that you grew up in or the town or whatever. It's just, there's so much to see out there, and there's so much behind these TVs and like phones with social media. That's only like, you only see so much. And I feel like when you really get out and you start to explore the real world, and you become so much more well rounded, and there's so much to be learned. Like, you just can't learn enough.
I ask the military members I have on the show that have been deployed about, the horrors that they see. And I mean that as far as, the atrocities that justify us sending people over there, but then conversely, the kindness and compassion. And it's that shared humanity that you hear in Iraq and Afghanistan and all these other places. And I just shared a video yesterday, and it was a car that had veered off the road and was in a river. And all these, good Samaritans, these Iraqis were all there diving in and pulling kids out of this car. And that could have been anywhere. It could have been London. It could have been, Orlando. It could have been anywhere on the planet. And I think this
Mhm.
is what we've got to, I think, really kind of take a step back and get away from this politicking and refine the fact that no matter where you go on the planet, most people are good people that just want to put a roof over their head, food in their kids' stomachs, and watch them grow and become productive adults themselves. And the moment that you're told, "Oh, this group, no, 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 they're all bad," that you kind of need to question the person that tells you that in the first place.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opinions out there about just about everything. I don't really get involved in politics. It's just not my forte. I don't know enough about it. I'm not one to ever speak on something that's like beyond my scope. But yeah, I can tell you that as being a police officer, having done this job in one of the biggest cities in this country, there's a lot of everything. There really is. There's a lot of bad, there's a lot of good, there's a lot of scary, there's a lot of great and funny. I mean, everything. There's just everything out there. And I think it's case by case. Um, yeah, that's really, but I do know that unfortunately I have seen a very much uh big amount of the ugly side of humanity, and that's difficult when you do this job because we're not getting called for some of the most wonderful things that are going on in society. So yeah, there is a lot of bad and ugly out there, unfortunately, and I don't think I would have known that unless I would have really done this job, because you really see a lot more than you think you're going to see and experience. So
Yeah. And I think we get a very skewed perspective because we're going to everyone's worst day. And you guys, obviously, there's criminality involved usually when you're called as well. So we get immersed in that small section that is constantly desperate and, distrusting of your profession and demanding of my profession. So it can skew you as a first responder if that's all you see day in, day out, as far as your perspective on humanity as a whole.
yeah, I still have tried to ground myself throughout the years, and I know a lot of first responders that still try to ground themselves too, and not get sucked into this idea that everyone in the world is bad. Um, Again, it's how you yourself like balance it out, right, and balance your life. So, um, yeah, I haven't, I can't say I've really been sucked into this like one extreme or another way of thinking. I think the healthiest way and the right way would be just to kind of find a middle ground, if you will.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then back to your kind of early life. When you were in the school ages, what were you playing as far as sports and exercise?
Oh, I was a swimmer, and very early on, my mom had us going in the direction of like continuing our swimming with competitions. And I was a lifeguard at the age of 16 because that was the actual legal age of lifeguarding here in Chicago. We have a big lakefront, so I was a lifeguard on the lakefront and then moved on to the pools.
I was
And
a
so that was
lifeguard
what
as
we did
well
during the summer.
for
I'm
for a
sorry.
long. I was a lifeguard as well for a long time, and it's funny because
Yeah,
in that profession, we were held to a standard every 2 years. You had to recertify. You had to do all
yeah,
your physical tests and your toes and your CPR and everything. And then I get
yeah,
into the fire service, and it's the same in law enforcement. They're like, "Oh no, we don't have
yeah.
mandatory fitness tests." And it's so weird coming from the lifeguarding community because you're like, why would you not have a mandatory fitness test in a profession where people are trying to kill you? And it's the same with lifeguarding. Imagine an ocean lifeguard that said, "Well, I don't want to learn how to swim anymore."
Yeah,
I'll be the adrenaline will kick in. I'll be able to get that kid. I know you won't. So it's so bizarre. I don't know if you had the same perspective that when you
yeah.
come from lifeguarding and go into our profession, you expect to be held to that high standard throughout your career.
Absolutely. And that I feel was very helpful at such a young age. It kind of molded me with like discipline and having structure and definitely for training. Like I've been training since I can remember, you know. We were trained annually. So it was, yeah, it was very serious business, and having that responsibility of, you know, you're there to help others, and, you know, just always being prepared to respond to any kind of emergency. Yeah.
So, what about career aspirations? Were you already thinking of law enforcement? Or was there something else when you were in the high school age?
Oh no. Clearly in high school I just was having fun. Wasn't thinking of anything. But when I went to college, I actually wanted to be a doctor, a pediatric doctor, believe it or not. And I went into college as pre med. And then I realized how much work it was actually going to take and how much studying. And I was like, I'm going to be undecided for a couple of years. So I did that. And then I went down the psychology route. And that was really what I was fixed on and I really seemed to love. And I knew I would have to go on to graduate studies because with a bachelor's in psychology, there, you know, it's one of those where you really need to move on further to further your education and get a master's or something higher for to be able to really do work in the field. So I eventually went back to get my master's once I had started the police department, and I was young in my 20s. So I was like, you know, balancing the two.
What made you go into the police department when you're on the psychology road?
Oh, so when you're in your 20s, you know how we all think we have it all figured out and we think we know everything about life, yet we haven't spent a day in our lives in the real world? That was me. I thought, okay, I definitely wanted to go to the FBI. So I thought at the time. And so my thinking, because I didn't really have anyone in my family who's ever been in law enforcement, I thought that maybe it would be better if I went and did a municipal uh, I had a municipal experience by working at a local police department, and that would show that I have experience. And so when I would apply to the FBI, that they would then take me, you know, not realizing, no, actually, they like to take you right out of college too. So that was what I thought. I didn't know any better. So my plan was, let me go to the police department, get the experience. I'll go back to grad school and then I'll apply to the FBI. And then you realize, yeah, no, life doesn't really always work the way you think. And, you know, before I knew it, I was already in the police department for so long, and it was kind of hard to walk away and start all over, go through a whole new academy again. And, you know, all that, you know, that goes into it. So I stayed with the police department.
What had lit that fire for the FBI? Was it Agent Starling, or was there another inspiration?
I don't know. I just think I don't know. I can't remember really what it was exactly, but I just thought, I don't know, maybe the FBI is just the way to go. Again, in their 20s, you don't know anything. You think you know. So I was just, you know, kind of trying to figure it out as I went along, and this is kind of where I landed.
Well, you touched on before about, seeing some of the dark side of our communities that we're all exposed to in our profession. You've gone through the lifeguarding route. You're kind of on this career path. What was your on ramp experience like when you were actually kind of saw behind the proverbial curtain in Chicago?
So before I got on the job, meaning as I was younger.
Well, no, when you got on the job. For me, I grew up on a farm in England. Had a
Oh,
pretty amazing adventure in my life up to that point. But when I put the uniform on, that's when I was like, oh, there's another complete side to society that I've never seen before. What was yours? I mean, in the city of Chicago, I would assume it might be quite striking the difference between the two.
so I was born and raised in the city. So that city life wasn't it wasn't new to me. And I thought I was pretty well. I like grew up in a pretty diverse area, obviously very diverse ethnicities, all of that. I thought I was pretty well rounded culturally. And then when I got on the job, um, bef- and by the way, when I grew up in a pretty, you know, decent neighborhood, hardworking, middle class. Everybody, you know, we still went out in front and played with our friends and played tag and all those things that, you know, you would do. You played till the street lights came on. So yeah. But when I got on the job, I definitely went to some tougher areas where I really wasn't exposed to that, like some of those things, those crimes, those violent situations, and that for me was kind of like a culture shock. And I was like, wow, oh wow, I had never really been exposed to shootings. I had never really been exposed to high drug populated areas. So for me, I thought, oh wow, I thought I had kind of been exposed. Clearly not enough.
And what about the mental health conversation when you entered? That was kind of like mid 2000s, wasn't it? So what was the conversation, if anything, for a young police cadet at that time?
Oh, what mental health conversation? Like, no, not at all. I got on in 2004. There wasn't a conversation. I do remember at one point there was something where they were trying to kind of introduce us to a couple of mental health diagnoses regarding the public. Like, you may run into individuals who you may have to deal with that are not cooperative, who are drunk, right? But then you may run across somebody who maybe has like bipolar disorder or maybe schizophrenia. And so this is what you might want to consider. This is what that might kind of look like behavior wise. And that was it. That was the end.
And what about at that time on the streets? You know, but obviously now as we sit here, fentanyl and there's a couple other trank, some of the ones that are really ravaging our communities at the moment. What were you seeing in the communities back then?
Um, Back then, obviously marijuana was something that was not legal. So that was something very common, especially when you did a lot of traffic, if you did traffic stops or you came across that. Um, in the areas that I dealt with, it was very much heroin, that the crack epidemic at the time. That's really what I was seeing more than anything when I started.
So as you progress through, when did you start seeing your psychology journey and your law enforcement journey start to overlap and realize that even the people that you were working alongside, maybe even yourself, needed this same conversation?
So very early on in my career, it was actually the suicide rates and the how often the suicides were occurring, where I started to realize, oh my gosh, we really have a problem here. Psychologically, I started to really pay attention to a lot of the chatter in response to all the suicides that would occur, and that's what really kind of triggered all of this. And it was really seeing and hearing how the chatter and roll call in the station and all around amongst us officers, I started to realize, wow, there's really a lot of questions and there's this huge gap of knowledge around suicide that exists, and no one was addressing it. And we were just kind of all trying to get answers to certain questions because we weren't understanding how this would happen, um, what caused it, um, why it continued to be such an issue for some individuals, right? Some people were taking their lives and others weren't. So that's really for me, from a psychological standpoint, where I started to really start having my own questions. And I really wanted to get further involved in trying to get to the root of the problem.
When you say the suicide rate, are you talking about in the community that you were serving or actually within your own community?
Actually, no, within our own community of first responders, specifically for police officers at the time, but I also knew firemen and paramedics and dispatchers and military that were taking their life. But for sure, at the time, specifically, it was in my own agency amongst my own fellow officers.
When I look back at the timeline, you know, as far as my awareness of it and what I saw in the people that I surround myself with, it seemed like it wasn't until about 2016 ish when there was some events. You know, there's one local fire chief that took his own life, and he did a Facebook post that took off, and that was, I would say, one of the catalysts really that got this conversation going. But that's, you know, not even 10 years ago, 9 years ago, so such a short time. When was this realization, and then what was the environment as far as the stigma that was suppressing these statistics and these conversations happening?
So for me, early on, I would say within the first 2 to 3 years is when I really started to pay attention to how often we were hearing, oh, there was another individual that took his life anywhere in, and we have a pretty big department in Chicago. So it wasn't just like in my actual district, which is what we call like a precinct or station. It didn't have to be from ours. It was anywhere in the city, any precinct, any unit. Um, and it was just pretty devastating. Even if we didn't know the individual, we didn't know, we never really worked with the individual. It was just so painful. And then when you did know somebody that was reacting to that death that actually knew the individual, it was just that much more heartbreaking. Um, and no, it was just, there was no talk about it, no conversations, just questions and assuming what caused it, right? Everyone was always looking for a cause of death in a sense, right? Like what, well, oh, well, I heard it was because John was going through a divorce, as to say that, the divorce is what caused the suicide. And for me, I was like, I'll never forget it. Very early on, I was just kind of like, wow, that I know we have a high divorce rate in our field, but man, if that were the case, then we're all going to be killing ourselves. Like, this is crazy. So for me, I felt like there's something missing. Like, there's more to this. There has to be. There's just no way it could be because of that one particular thing. And so, sure enough, as I continued on with my studies and research and all of that, that's where I came to learn that, yeah, it's a lot more than people understand, than people think, that really contributes to an individual getting to this point.
So walk me through again the kind of evolution of your psychology journey. Now you're actually wearing the uniform. Where did you go academically, and where did that take you as far as starting to identify the multiple factors that contribute to suicide?
So I went back to get my master's degree in forensic psychology. I also had to do 700 hours of clinical work for that field. And then I became interested in really just continuing the work within trauma and suicide for first responders. And I ended up getting certified to do suicide psychological autopsies as an investigator. So I went through an association where I had to go through training and um, submit cases and, just go through the whole process once I was certified. And then I started to do these psychological autopsies on cases of other first responders whose families I would approach about the work that I'm doing and why I'm doing it, to try to get more information and try to navigate and figure out, is there a way that we can maybe start reducing these suicides, turn this around, and provide a more proactive approach instead of being so reactive? Because at the time then, even now still, our approach to suicide is simply reactive, and all we tend to do is we have a suicide occur, and this is anywhere in the country. And I've seen this through all agencies. You have the suicide, it occurs, everyone has a reaction to it, mostly an emotional response, and everyone understands and agrees that this is a horrific, worst case scenario that can happen. However, 5 to 7 days after we've laid the person to rest, we're back to business as usual. And then we wait for the next one to happen. And when it does, it happens exactly the same way with the same response. And that's all we're doing. And so it's kind of like, everyone understands what the definition of insanity is, yet we keep living it every single day. No one's really trying to get to the bottom of understanding, like, well, why does this happen? How does this happen? Is there anything that we can potentially do? Like, really understand, especially through those cases of the individuals that unfortunately we've lost, how we owe it to them and their families. How can we get to the bottom of understanding? Okay, let's take this case. What happened here? What was going on with the individual? Is there anything that we could potentially put in place to intervene, to be more proactive, so that, this doesn't continue to happen maybe as often as it is? And so that's really where my journey began. And I've continued to um, conduct those psychological suicide autopsies.
the reactive element, I think, is exactly what we suffer from in the fire, especially. Like law enforcement, there's an element of prevention. You know, whether you're putting a speed trap out and people are slowing down, oh, there's a cop, and you probably prevented an accident there. For us, you've got yourself in whatever predicament, medically, physically, and then you call us. I'm having my worst day. Firefighters come and please mitigate and unfuck the situation.
Yeah,
But we've got that, you know, the people that are in our leadership started in a fire academy. They didn't start in, you know, a leadership academy. They didn't start in a proactive think tank. And so we've been, you know, groomed to be reactive. And I see this at the top now. And I see this in this conversation. And it's so glad that you said that, because locally, they've lost, the department that protects my family has lost 4 people in uniform to suicide in 4 years. A
I'm
fifth one
sorry.
survived their attempt, and a sixth one had left the agency, I think, not too long ago, and then went to another agency and took his own life. So technically, that's, you know, five actual and one attempted in 4 years, and they just stick their head in the sand and keep doing the same thing. And they've been exposed to some of the proactive solutions. And this is, you know, what's so maddening. There's a Desmond Tutu quote. It says, "We spend so much time pulling people out of the river, we forget to go upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place." And this is what we
Exactly.
need to do as a profession.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, as I do these, I start to see, because I really go really deep into an individual's life from the time of death as far back as I need to go. In some cases, I will reach, will tap into childhood. I know a lot of people are like, oh, that was back when I was a kid. That was a long time ago. I'm an adult now. Like I got through all of that. And it's like, okay, that's what you think and that's what you say. However, I have seen how a lot of individuals, most individuals, a lot of their childhood experiences, childhood traumas, and all of that really have an effect and impact on who they are today. And still, even as you're a 30, 40, 50-year old individual, there's still impacts from childhood that you think you've gotten over that don't affect you. And they really do. They continue to affect you. They really mold how your behaviors and how the decisions you make and how you move around in life.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I had a guy on, Jake Clark, who's from the founder of Save a Warrior. And he's the first person that actually really made me think about early life for us. And then you start learning that, you know, I know this is kind of a generalization, but a lot of us, our ACEs, you know, our adverse childhood experience scores are 6, as are
Mhm.
many military members, as are many incarcerated men and women. And so if you think about it, you had struggles when you were young, you know, that can send you obviously down a dark path of addiction and alcoholism when you're young, or it can send you down the path of, well, I'm going to be a warrior. I'm going to cover myself in armor and I'm going to be the protector. I'm going to be
Mhm.
so busy that I don't have to think about that thing. I'm going to bury it down. So it makes so much sense that so many of us have this. And
Yeah.
to turn your head away from the formative years, you're missing such a huge piece of this puzzle.
Yeah. I find that a lot of first responders and military, we tend to have had something one way or another. And it doesn't have to be severe, but somehow something in our young childhood years and that um, early adulthood, something happened, something struck us, something really impacted us where and a lot of the times it's trauma of some to some degree. Again, it doesn't have to be super severe, but um where now we want to help others not have to experience whatever that was, and we want to be able to be there to protect others from what maybe we've experienced, something along those lines. And I do love that these individuals want to do good for the world, and we all want to help. However, people don't really believe this saying that if you don't help yourself, you can't help others. Like, you're no good to others. And so the problem becomes that, I know people, we've gone through things and we want to help others, but if you haven't unpacked all your shit and you haven't gotten through it all and you haven't processed your own traumas, your own issues, and try to work on yourself, um it's only going to continue to build. It doesn't just stop and pause and all of a sudden you're just magically like great. You're going to have more issues to deal with. Other people's traumas and problems and things you experience in this line of work, it just adds to what you already haven't dealt with. And so that's where we start to see the issues, people not processing and dealing with their own issues, and yet we want to help others. And that's so great and noble, but you really have to focus and make yourself good and better before you can take care of anyone else. And that's a reality of life.
It's been really interesting. I've interviewed over 1,000 people now, and so I'm not exaggerating. A third, if not a half, of those people have been at that point. And there's such a strong correlation between people that got to the absolute darkest point. Some of them went through their attempt and they survived. Kevin Hines on the Golden Gate Bridge, and Emma Benoit shot herself as 18 years old. And now they're amazing beacons of light in the mental health world. But almost every single one of those, they had this childhood trauma and it was unaddressed. And I think this is where we need to put hope in the post-traumatic growth conversation. Is just because you had trauma doesn't mean that now you're going to spiral downwards and fall apart as a first responder. It's just that you weren't given the environment when you were younger to work through that. I was so fortunate. I talk about this all the time. I had a lot of stuff when I was young, but I grew up on a farm. My dad was a veterinary surgeon. So we were healing animals. I'm one of 5 kids. We ate around the dining room table all the time. I was surrounded by therapy animals, basically. I was in nature. I had fresh air. I had community. So all the things that we know work, by a sheer, Russian roulette that I was born in that family, I had equally and oppositely things that allowed me to process the bad things as we were going along. So I think this is what's so encouraging about the type of people that find themselves in uniform, is that you can be more resilient from this. Once you identify it and you find your toolbox to work through it, you're going to be an even better police officer, firefighter, dispatch after you've done the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the conversations, I do appreciate that we're living in a society today where people are trying to address mental health, especially for our populations, right? And the work that we do. They're starting to realize, aha, actually they are human beings. And the way it works is that, these things will catch up to them. It will be difficult to deal with. And that's pretty normal, right? Because if we were machines or robots, it would be different, but we're not. So all this does have an effect one way or another on you, even if it's minor or major. I think I do appreciate we're having more of the talk about mental health and all, but no one's really touching on suicide. And I think what really needs to be understood is that when we talk about trauma, we talk about mental health, we talk about all of that, it's important for people to understand that if we get ahead of it, if we start being proactive, we deal with those things instead of, worrying about the stigma, or for whatever reason, we just keep, trying to, you know, just shove it down and be in denial of it. If we deal with it and we deal with it in a healthy manner and we deal with it early on, you won't have to worry about the likelihood of you falling into crisis, right? Because you're dealing with it early on. It's when people have no healthy coping mechanisms or tools for self-care, when you're not dealing with it and you fall into crisis, it's just that much harder to come out of. And then now the likelihood of you continuing to spiral even further into a darker, deeper hole in the direction of suicide is greater. So people need to start thinking about, not worried about, oh, what are people going to think of me, or, the stigma. People need to start thinking about how, with anything else, if we had something medically wrong with us, for the most part, no one's going to sit there and say, yep, I'm just going to engage in that one thing that's going to give me the heart attack. Yeah, sign me up for it. No, you're going to try in some way or another to avoid something that will take you in that direction. We need to start doing that with mental health, just like when we do it for any medical issue.
So this is an interesting question for you. I think we talked about this when we spoke a few weeks ago, but through, again, this constant education I'm getting through speaking to all these amazing people, I started realizing that the arguably insane tests that I kept taking, because I work for 4 different fire departments, it didn't make any sense to me then. And so I started asking the people in psychology, psychiatry, this test that we take, and I discovered it's called the Minnesota Multiphasic Interview, a personality interview. And I said, talk to me about the ability of that standalone test to determine if I'm going to be a worthy firefighter or police officer. So I'm going to give you the mic. Talk to me about that test and talk to me about its ability to, verify if we're the right kind of person and we're mentally sound for a job in the first responder professions.
So it's interesting with that test, because I think what they're really looking for is to see if, we all have different characteristics of all those different personalities, right? But I think they're trying to maybe weed out like the ones that are really severe, specific to one or another. I never really got why we really focus so much on that exam as opposed to when we do the like fit for duty evaluations, where we're really trying to measure more so like what your mental status is, as far as like that you're not suicidal, that you're not a threat to others, and you're not trying to harm yourself or others. I think those make more sense for me when I look at that. um but yeah, and I think in our agency, if I recall, I don't really recall that. It was so long ago. But that personality test, they didn't really push that as much as they were trying to measure like whether you were, mentally, if you were of sound mind, in the sense that you weren't, a threat to yourself, to others, that you weren't suicidal, that you weren't actually crimes that you had committed that you're trying to not disclose, drugs or anything like that. That was like really more of the concern then.
I just interviewed a guy, Don, who uh Dan, excuse me, his name's Dan, who does background checks now, former law enforcement officer is himself. And this is kind of one thing that seems like might be a better fit is you're going to do a physical test because this person fit
Mhm.
enough. You're going to do a written test so they understand the job. You're going to do a thorough background check, which, should show, okay, they've done this or that, or, whatever. Is this detrimental? Is this something that we can overlook because it was minor and it was, 15 years ago, whatever it is. But that tells you about the person. But
Mhm.
the MMPI, which I'm told usually in psychology is used as a forensic psychologist, so with a gamut of other tests to give an overall view of a person,
Mhm.
rather than giving that and or the polygraph, which I did 3 times as well, which is really interesting magic show. Um,
Yeah. I
you
still don't get that one.
no, I mean
We don't do it. Yeah.
yeah,
I've
you're
never
grooming
had
people
anyone
to
do
lie
that.
basically. But back to the point, so you got all this money, thousands per recruit. To
Mhm.
me, why not take that money and give these recruits X amount of counseling sessions at the front door their first year? So now you're giving them an opportunity to start processing what they brought in. You're normalizing the mental health conversation from day one, and you've removed any barrier to entry because they already know Susie or Steve now. And anytime they need a tune up, they know exactly where to go. So to me, when you're talking about that culture and that stigma, if you've got a new recruit and then the academy and then day one, you're already talking about this is as important as the PT is, I think you could change the entire culture then.
Yeah, there's been a lot of agencies that I've come across around the country that are really, that particular conversation has come up. The question of, do we mandate therapy, and not just like in the beginning in the recruit status, like in the academy, but even in the whole department. Do we mandate that everybody has to see a clinician at least once? And if you kind of umbrella it over everybody, it kind of like helps with that stigma. Um, and there's a lot of different debates around that, right? And then, because we are, most of these agencies around the country, they are unionized and they have the union, that, there's all these rights and laws and all of that. Um, I think at the very least, what we should be doing is just having the conversation about, um, first of all, just about mental health, which we're starting to do a little bit more, but really just starting to educate everybody, provide the psychoeducation, on what it is that this all looks like, right? Because we can just say, "Oh, go get help. Go talk to somebody. Go do this." And most of us who are not in this field are like, "What does that really mean?" Right? Like you can tell me, "Go get help." Okay, from who? And what kind of help? What are my options? How does that even begin? Like, do I pick up a phone? Do I call someone? Do I Google it? Like, people really don't know this information. And so when I actually started to do this work and I started to see a lot of the suicide autopsy um, data, one of the things that I really started to find was the amount of individuals that really just have no knowledge on things that you would think, oh, well, don't we all know that? No, we just don't. We assume we do, right? Um, there's so much that people don't understand that they're going through. Like they don't really realize, like, we may know something's off with us, we may know things aren't right, but we don't know exactly what it is. And then we don't know who to turn to because we're the breed of individuals that are always in control, right? We're always the ones that everyone comes to for answers and for decisions to be made. So now when we find ourselves in a space where we're not sure what to do or what's going on, that's really hard to deal with. That's a very difficult pill to swallow. And so for us, it's just easier to be like, no, 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 I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, and just be in denial of it and just try to look in the other direction. But so I'm finding that there's a huge knowledge gap when it comes to our own self-care, mental health, all the way, like everything that contributes and puts you at risk for suicide. It's not until people are so deep in it that now it's like, oh shit, like what do we do? How do we come out of this? Or no one knows really what to do. We don't know what to do for others, you know what I mean, who are in those situations, our fellow coworkers. So I think what I started to see was that there was a gap of knowledge that needed to be filled. And by providing that psychoeducation, just like our agencies will provide any kind of training for us on, I don't know, as police officers, here's how you're going to handle this weapon. No one threw a gun at me and said, go figure it out, little 23-year-old Liz. I mean, everything from how to handle the weapon, how to disassemble it, how to clean it, how to shoot, everything. I was taught. They gave me the skill set. Same with fire. They don't just throw you on, on the fire truck and say, figure out how this thing works and what to do. And they walk you through all that training. You go through such intense training. Why aren't we doing that when it comes to our self-care and the fact that, hey, if you do this job for a while, there are going to be experiences that you're going to have, right? From the job that maybe kind of gets in the way of like your personal life and vice versa, and how to handle that, and what are some possible tips and ways and options for you to be able to balance it all and navigate the traumas from the job, the traumas before the job, that will now be triggered from things that you're dealing with in your personal life and the job, and so on. We need to give these people the tools and the knowledge so that they can cope and deal with their issues in a healthy manner, get through it, and just move on in a healthy way so that they can continue to work these careers, eventually retire. And the most important thing is once they're done with these jobs and they retire, they can actually continue to live these healthy, amazing lives. It'll actually be the beginning of a new chapter for them to live an even more amazing life after such service to society.
I've been saying this recently. You and we're standing on the shoulders of giants when it comes to our professions, whether it was firearms training, and tactics for you, whether it was, the SCBA and the extrication training for me. And I think that our generation now, the gift that we can give to the next one is actually the wellness, the mental health, the shifts, all these things that we can start fixing now. So this next generation of young people enters a profession, they've got the tactics that's constantly evolving that was off, our ancestors. And now we've started fighting for the mental health, for the fitness standards, for the work week that allows performance and longevity and keeps marriages intact. So I think that we really can be pioneers. All of us that kind of came on 20-ish years ago, it's up to us now to make those same innovations that our forefathers did.
Yeah, I think one thing that I notice about this younger group um, nowadays that is coming on the job, like, around this time today. They're younger, their generation, they're actually willing to hear it, right? When if we're getting them early on at the entry level at recruit status in the academy, we're normalizing it for them early on. It's not like, because once you get out there and you hear the mindset of like, oh, tough it up, kid, like you're weak, if that, now you're kind of molding that, their way of thinking. And here's the thing, I can say that I appreciate 21 years ago when I got on this job, a lot of those old timers that had that mindset of like, toughen up, kid, like shut up and, speak when spoken to. It was different. It was very different. I will say I could appreciate the fact that, I learned so much from those individuals. And yeah, there was a lot of, there's resilience, and they wanted you to kind of, like be tough to a certain degree. However, what I say to old timers and people even before those old timers is that the job, the way of life, the world has evolved. And as the world evolves, we need to evolve. So I don't trash the way that things were done 20 years ago, 21 years ago. I mean, that's just all they had, right? That's the way it was because that's the way they were trained. A lot of those ways did work, but a lot of them didn't. And what I will say is the level of crime, the gruesomeness, the violence to these crimes, how often, how severe, the school shootings, for instance, that's not something that our forefathers necessarily dealt with back in the day, right? In the 50s and the 60s and so on. So because it's evolved, this is like intense now. It's so much more complex and it's so much more violent. We see it, the accessibility. We don't even have to just be at the job to see it. We have it in front of our face every day on our phones, on social media. We got that vicarious trauma because we're seeing things live streamed. It's crazy. So as the world evolves, my message is we have to evolve. So maybe it worked, and in some cases it did back then for some people. But what we're living in today, it's just not going to cut it anymore. So we have to actually, we're kind of like being forced into like, hey, after a while, this is going to catch up with you and it's going to be a problem. So we do have to deal with it. We have to evolve and we have to just kind of change our approach.
What is the contrast between the demand for your profession when you first came on, how competitive it was, versus how it is as we sit here in 2025?
Oh man. The demand. I think definitely nowadays it's so difficult. First of all, it's just such a difficult time um for law enforcement specifically. You know, and I love our firemen, and most people do, but unfortunately, that's just not the same sentiment towards the police, towards law enforcement. So I think it's definitely like the morale has definitely plummeted more. And I think a lot of it, there's so many different reasons. Leadership, I think, is one of the biggest issues as to why, like, they allow that to happen, right? Like, you need a strong leader to really kind of lead the pack. And I think the biggest issue nowadays is just having so much chatter, so many, it's kind of like too many chefs in the kitchen, if you will. Um, Everyone's got something to say, everyone's critiquing everything. And so I can't imagine now having to be a beat cop, a beat officer on patrol because I'm at a different unit now, but what they have to deal with, because now it's like it's not just your supervisors and the department, your agency critiquing or that you have to answer up to, it's the public and the fear of, did I do what I was supposed to, even though this is how I was trained and I'm following protocol, and I think that's very difficult. It makes it very difficult to do the job. You know what I mean? You're getting pulled in different directions with all that noise, and yet you're still expected to do the job every day. And most officers and most first responders, the majority of them, do a fantastic job every single day. They selflessly get up, they get out there, they deal with some of the worst shit from people, and they continue to do this every day. Even if they're frustrated and tired of that, they still get up every day and they do the job. Um, and I just think that it's unfortunate that a lot of people in society really just don't get how much people sacrifice doing this type of work as a first responder every day, how much of their own mental, emotional, physiological, um, sacrifices that they make to do this job, and how it catches up and how it really just tears people's family. I mean, they just continue to do it. And I don't think people realize it until they actually do it, right? Until they're in those shoes, that they actually understand how much this first responder job takes a toll on people.
Absolutely. What's been interesting trying to unpack the recruitment crisis from the fire side is, as you're probably familiar with, I don't know if it's the case in Chicago, but most of the country, they work 56-hour work weeks. And now you add this recruitment crisis that a lot of the firefighters are working 80-hour weeks. And obviously, as you can imagine, I'm sure we'll dive into sleep deprivation. There's so many elements of that that are so detrimental to their own health, to their mental health, to their relationships. And what we're seeing is this Gen Z, this young generation, are actually going to the trades because, as you said, everyone's got that device. They have this information in front of them. So even college, they're looking at that going, well, it's $50,000 worth of debt and a piece of paper that doesn't guarantee me a job. That doesn't sound very good. I think I'm going to go be a welder. I can do a year's training and then I make, six figures or whatever it is. So we have a workforce that wants to do what we do, but they value their mental health, they value their physical health, they value their relationships. So whether it's my profession, and this is starting to happen in Florida and some other places now, going to a healthier work week, which is attracting people back into the profession, which is filling those vacancies, and now they're fully staffed with a healthier work week, these young people are going, that actually looks good. But if we don't fix it, like many agencies, and we just bury our head in the sand, or we don't support our police officers when they're doing, as you said, the right thing, and it's just being politicized, then we're driving these young recruits away from the profession. And we're at a point now where you either fix the things that are broken, or you don't have a police department anymore. So I, being an incurable yet angry optimist, think this is the perfect time to make change. But I think that the public need to understand that if we don't support our police officers, especially, and we don't kind of push back against this politicking, then they're going to be unprotected. And imagine calling 911 and you just get a dial tone because there is no police department anymore.
Yeah, I've thought of this many a times. What I've learned is, and this is where with working with the public and everything, people can sit here and have all kinds of opinions all day, every day. I mean, really, they do. Um, until you've actually been in a situation where you need help, or you've been a victim of a crime, a victim of anything horrendous, actually, you don't really get it. And, people can have all their opinions on, you know, their political opinions, their gun opinions, the police opinions, all of that. You can have all those opinions. That's fine. We welcome them. What I tend to see though is how people's opinions will change drastically from negative to a maybe I should kind of reevaluate when the same individuals and the same issues that you're complaining about work in your favor. Meaning, you know, you can dislike the police or any first responder or have views of us and saying that, I mean, I've been called everything in the book, and so have many of my fellow officers, murderers, all of that. You name it, were abusive, etc., when the majority of us have never violated people's rights, let alone been brutal and horrible individuals a day in our career, right? There are bad apples in every occupation. Let's be clear about that. Think about it. Any occupation you can think of, there are some bad apples, and that's just what it is. Unfortunately, right now the climate is majority of the police just don't really fit that positive mold, right? And so, however you may feel, whatever you think about, whether you wanted to fund the police, abolish the police, whatever you want to do, I will tell you that, you know, when things happen and you really need us to be the ones running towards those bullets, like at those school shootings or any kind of like mass critical incident, you're at a concert and all of a sudden someone, attacks, whatever. It could be attacking a group with knives or shooting or whatever. It's pretty interesting how those those opinions and all of that really changes. People start to see and understand, like, wow, you know what? I really never took into account what it's like to have to, when it's really happening and it's really going down with a critical incident, how no matter how scared you are, because again, we're human beings, and if someone says any cop says they're not scared, they're lying. We are scared. We just fight or flight, right, kicks in, and we have to act, and we're trained to, even though it's scary, to go proceed and handle the situation. And we have families at home too that we're thinking about. And we do that, and people don't realize that any of this until they're in the situation where, like, oh my gosh, my life flashed before my eyes, or I was a victim of something, or this was such a scary situation. And until we saw how these individuals stepped in and saved us or brought us to safety, or they protected us, did we not realize up until then that, wow, there's a lot more that goes into it. So that's one of the most interesting things that I have learned throughout my years, and I still see. And sometimes, I'm not going to sit here and argue with people. They can have their opinions. I'm not offended if people, quite frankly, say they dislike the police. And I'm like, hey, I understand there might be some reason. There usually is some reason as to why you feel that way, or any other first responder. But what I do try to, emphasize is, don't be so quick to throw such opinions on what you may have seen on a 3-second clip that people are putting up or whatever. And you don't know the whole story and you actually haven't lived it. And, because if you find yourself there one day, you might reevaluate and be like, you know what? I didn't consider like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 factors that now maybe changes my perspective.
As you were doing this kind of analysis, this autopsy of all these suicides, what impact did organizational betrayal have? Because this is something that seems to come up over and over again and again. There's no one factor. But when you think about it tribally, we put on a uniform, we have our department's patch on our shoulder. That's our tribe. We will literally die for the people that we're serving, or the person to the left or the right of us in that situation. So that's such an incredible bond. And then when an agency turns their back on an individual in whatever capacity it is, that can be extremely detrimental emotionally, from what I've been told and what I've seen personally. What is your kind of perspective on that element?
So in all of the cases actually that I've conducted the psychological suicide autopsies, there are various factors, right, that really contribute to the individual getting to this point. um, as I like to call them, inner departmental issues, right? It could be betrayal, it could be whatever. It's a variety of different things within like the agency. Those are definitely factors that contribute. It's not the only sole factor, but it could be definitely one of the contributing. Um, and I have found that, I mean, it depends really. What every case is, it's just case by case. It's so different. It varies, right? I can have more um, possible weight in the area of interpersonal relationship issues, right? Where that was much heavier, the issues there, and then maybe possibly mental health and sleep deprivation having been more of the bigger, heavier issues, right, that really contributed versus the interdepartmental, or vice versa, right? So it very much varies. But I will say that, suicide or not, um, we are seeing a lot of impact that, you know, departmental betrayal has on the members. It's heavy, absolutely. It is something that people think about and worry about every day. I mean, it really has an impact on the job that you're going to do day to day, right? People don't want to be crucified for doing, if in fact they are doing exactly what they were trained to do and they're following protocol, but because of opinions or I don't know, influences outside of the agency and outside of policy, yeah, absolutely. That in any psychological normal mindset, like people would hesitate and be like, wow, I don't want to be the next, storyline. I don't want to be the next frontline, headliner. So there's definitely impact from that.
You touched on sleep deprivation, which is a big, big topic that I talk about a lot. And again, going back to the work weeks that we work, 56, 80, and then you have all these people on the show from the sleep medicine world, from the psychology, psychiatry world, and we hear about the direct correlation between sleep deprivation and, suicide ideation, addiction, all these other areas. As you're doing all these forensic analyses, what was the impact of sleep deprivation in these cases?
Oh my gosh, it's one of the higher risk factors up there. I have some like pretty acute risk factors at the top of the list, and then some that are little. There's still risks, but you have your top ones, right? And sleep deprivation definitely falls in there. It's interesting to me how with agencies, pretty much any agency across the country, if we engage in any kind of alcoholic beverage, right, that we may drink on the job, if we were to do that. This is just a hypothetical situation. If I engaged in drinking while I'm on duty, absolutely my judgment, it'd be fair to say that that's going to impair my judgment. So it's absolutely not allowed. And we would be in trouble if caught, right? Under any kind while we're impaired. And so when we look at studies when it comes to sleep, right, we have found that in some cases, if you're so sleep deprived, it's almost equivalent to an individual who is intoxicated, right, under the influence and has that impaired judgment. So I'm constantly wondering, how is it that if we're impaired, right, if our judgment is so impaired under the influence of alcoholic beverages, but it also can be just as impaired from sleep deprivation, how are we not putting more emphasis on that, on sleep deprivation? How are we not looking at it and saying, you know what, maybe this is like, yeah, this isn't a good thing. Maybe we need to focus more on trying to, push and give the information, right? Psychoeducate everyone on what the true real effects of sleep deprivation is and what that looks like. Like really just kind of give that information and like spell it out, like draw it out however we need to really just emphasize that. And we don't. We're just kind of like, yeah, whatever. I mean, and how age, that's another thing that I really focus on, is what we went through when we were sleep deprived when we were in our 20s versus sleep deprivation in your 40s and 50s. That is a whole nother ball game. Like you just cannot function the way you used to. Age really plays a big role. And we're very stuck. Sometimes we're a stubborn breed and we're stuck in our ways. And it's very hard for human beings to adapt to change and understand that, like, the body you had when you were in your 20s versus the body that you have now in your 40s and 50s. And listen, it's different. It really is. And the impacts that you will have from sleep deprivation in those different age ranges is significant. And so, if I was able to handle 5 hours or 4 hours of sleep in my 20s, I'm out all night and then I go straight to work, that's not the same thing when you're older or you have more responsibilities, right? You have families to take care of or other dependents that you have. All these things really play a role. And so I think people just don't know enough of it to really truly understand it. And they just kind of they go on autopilot, and until they're in a situation that's, detrimental to their health or others, they don't realize it. They don't get it.
Well, this is what's so maddening is that's been, shown by one of the leading human performance organizations in America to this local department. They've got all these deaths, and again, they just will not acknowledge the sleep deprivation element and go to this proactive measure where they get, more people and then attract more people and fill these holes, and now their firefighters are working a healthy work week. Is it the only thing? No, but is it a massive herd of elephants in the room? Of course it is. And so this is what's, really startling to me. And it's just, there's no other way of saying this. If you have lost all those people and you've been presented the information and you're unwilling to act on that, then now we're talking about courage or cowardice in leadership at this point. Like if there's literally, you buried your own people and you still refuse to change, then now this is to me where it's like, well, you need to step aside and let someone to actually lead them, because it's, it's if it happened once is one thing, but 4 times and you're still turning your head. I mean, come on.
Sometimes and this is just my opinion, sometimes in leadership roles in our professions, fire, police, paramedics, all of that, I feel that sometimes, listen, we were hired to do a job and to carry out certain policy and make sure certain procedures are followed and all of that. And we do that job and we do it well. And most of the people who are in leadership, they pretty much get to that point. They can handle that. But thinking outside the box or having additional credentials in areas like this to really truly understand, like they just don't know. They don't get it. They don't understand that because they don't have that background. And I think that's what makes it challenging, right? So I can sit here, if someone were to present anything from a psychological perspective, I can really pretty much get it and understand it, and I'm following because I have that background. Unfortunately, some leaders, they don't have anything more than the skill set to do the job that they're doing, right? And to be able to make sure policy is followed and to do the job of a police officer or of a firefighter. And anything beyond that, they're really not skilled at it. They don't know. And even when people who are the actual experts in those areas present it to them, again, they still just, it's like they don't really get it or they don't want to get it because they're just so focused on something else. And that's unfortunate. Like nowadays in leadership, you have to kind of be, I think, well-rounded in various aspects, right? Not just the duties of your job. Like there's so many other issues that are happening, so you kind of have to maybe have a little more understanding about how human beings function and trauma and how that will impact them, and so how sleep will, like deprivation, will impact them, and all of those things. Like you have to, if you don't have the background and knowledge on it, you have to maybe kind of take the time to listen to other experts that are well rounded in that area to kind of school you a little bit, if you will, so that helps with getting things, putting things in place that need to be put in place. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I think.
No, I agree completely. I think it comes down to humility. You have to be humble. You have to be like, I don't know about this. Which is, I mean, I've done this for 8.5 years and I'm continually learning from people like you. I'm a perpetual student. But you start to see these actors, and this is just it. These other people, this is what they do for a living: mental health, strength and conditioning, back injuries, whatever it is. This is their
Yeah.
area of expertise. You were a good firefighter or a paramedic or both, and then you took some officer classes, but that doesn't make you well-rounded, like you said, on all things human. So when
Right.
there's clearly glaringly an issue and you're losing people by droves, in the
Yeah.
ground, or out your back door as far as recruitment and retention, you've got to have the humility to go, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me find
Right.
who does. And let me be humble enough to actually listen rather than check a
Exactly.
box, close the book, and then do absolutely nothing.
Let me find what First, let me get to the bottom of the problem, try to reevaluate, find what works, like find something else instead of continuing the same cycle. It's very difficult in this type of work, in these professions. We're stubborn, right? We don't like change. We tend to, sometimes what I have found too is that we do things right? And sometimes you're like, why the hell are we doing it this way? This doesn't make sense. You're like, this is how we've always done it. And it's like, oh my God, it's maddening. This doesn't, like, just because this is how we've always done it doesn't mean we have to keep going this way. Like, at some point, if we're actually being presented with the fact that, like, this isn't really working anymore, or look at the results, like, it's not making sense, then somebody has to stand up and be like, hey, we might have to try something a little different, like just adjust at the very least a little bit. And I think that that's something that we need to start seeing. And one of the things that drives me just mad is when people cannot admit that they don't know something. Like, understand it doesn't make you an idiot. It doesn't make you less of a person. It's okay, because here's a little secret. Not everyone knows everything, right? There, I have yet to meet the person who knows absolutely everything about anything in this world and in life, right? There's always room for knowledge. There's always room for improvement. We could be 90 years old, and I guarantee you, I've talked to some 99-year-old people, okay? They can still learn something new in life, even at that age. So allow yourself, cut yourself some slack, and it's okay to admit that you don't know something. Go find the answer or find someone who knows it. Don't try to be a know-it-all. To sit there and have, like, focus on your pride and your ego, because you know what I mean, that just doesn't get anyone anywhere, especially in these professions. So I think it's more of a humble and stronger individual who will say, you know what, I'm not quite sure. This is beyond my scope, because there are going to be many things in life that are beyond your scope. Don't try to answer up for it because you just want to sound like you actually sound like an idiot when it's clear that you have no knowledge, no expertise in a particular area, but you want to just keep, trying to make decisions or keep talking on something that you have no knowledge on. I think once people start to understand that, like, hey, it's okay that I don't know anything. Let me figure it out. Let me get someone who does. I think that's more noble. Yeah.
I can say from experience, I've watched it with this progressive work week alone. Here's the secret sauce. The people that have figured out a better way of doing things, whether it's creating a wellness program, whether it's a in-house mental health program, whether it's this work week, those departments want to help the rest of the nation. They want to, the rising tide lifts all ships. Those departments bend over backwards to disseminate, information to help people, give them a blueprint. Well, this worked here. We're not exactly the same size as you, but here's the principles. Now you should be able to apply it to your department. So it's humility, but again, because we're so siloed as a profession or professions, and every city and county is kind of on their own, and some work well together and some hate each other, whatever it is, in the nation, there's people doing almost everything that we struggle with really well. So we need to have the humility to find out, okay, well, who's doing strength and conditioning well? Who's doing injury prevention well? Who's doing mental health well? Who's doing the work week well? Okay, well, then how did you do that? What were the challenges? What have been the results? And there's people, I've got people on this podcast for free. You just got to go online and hit play, and you can hear all these departments and all these great leaders that have done this. So this is the thing. It's just being humble enough to say, like you said, I don't know it all. I don't know what I'm doing in this particular area. Can someone help me? And then someone over in the Northeast or the Southwest or wherever it is will be like, hey, we figured that out in Dallas, in New York, in wherever. You want to try this? I'll show you what we did. So this is the beautiful thing. This is the brotherhood and sisterhood, is sharing this information. And I wish that our national unions, I don't know how it is in law enforcement, but in fire, there isn't this communication network where everyone's talking to each other. That's what I was envisioning when I joined the union, 20 years ago. But so if we can't do that, well, then now we've got the internet, we've got the virtual world, we've got social media. So now we can knowledge share that way. But yeah, the solutions are out there. We're having a conversation with solutions right now. So it's just having the humility to go, well, let me listen to Liz. She sounds like she knows what she talks about. So
yeah, I think, God, we're in such a great space in this world where information can travel so quickly, and you can have so much actual great information at your hands so quickly. And I think, yeah, if there are definitely a lot of agencies out there that are, doing better. They're getting it right. There's some that are kind of stuck maybe in ways where it's like, we could improve. Um, but yeah, there's always definitely um, the opportunity to get to the bottom of what your issues are and try to improve them. I mean, no one has the answers where, it's like this is the exact way to like be successful and it's all going to work out. No, but we can definitely try, especially when, we see that what we're doing isn't working and it's just causing more harm than it is any good.
100%. Well, going back to the autopsies of the suicides, one of the areas that this is just my own hypothesis, but it makes a lot of sense. When you are a healthy human being, when your mind is programmed the way it's supposed to be, and you, for example, we went to the top of a 20-story high rise and we stood near the edge, there'd be that invisible hand pushing you back, going, "What the hell are you doing? Get back." We're supposed to thrive. We're supposed to procreate. We're supposed to then protect our offspring. It's in our DNA. When I think about not only the skewed nature that you get as far as all these elements that we've talked about, sleep deprivation and unaddressed trauma and all the other factors that I'm sure we'll get to some other ones in a minute, now this brain becomes miswired. And now what I've heard from a lot of people on the show is there's this feeling of burdensome. Like, well, if I'm the reason for my family's pain, and if I just take myself out, then they'll be happy. But I think there's still that hand. And what's so sad is it would appear in a lot of these suicide completions, alcohol is involved. And if I think about being in my late teens, early 20s and going to the clubs and drinking and maybe ending, up going home with someone and the next morning going, "Oh, I actually don't think that person's very attractive." We know alcohol can skew your perspective and it can dull some of these senses. And it breaks my heart because I wonder if some of these people, if they were stone cold sober, would they have actually gone through with it? So big old monologue before the question. With all these suicides that you did the autopsies for, or you overviewed the autopsies, what was the magnitude of alcohol involvement in those attempts or those successes in that particular example?
That's an excellent question. I'll put it to you like this. I have yet to have a suicide where alcohol was not present within the last 12 hours of the suicide completion. Um, it's interesting because we know that alcohol and some substance, drug abuse of some sort, has always been an issue within this population, right? And we know that it's a problem, but yet no one wants to address it. I think for a couple reasons. One, it's just hard to address because it's really kind of embedded in our culture, right? And on top of it, really no one knows what to say about it and how to talk about it, right? So I love that you bring this up because this is one of the pieces because of this that I keep seeing in the autopsies. I was like, this is one of the pieces that really needs to be tackled in the psychoeducation that I provide. And in that, without going too much in depth about it, the issue with alcohol isn't that we are necessarily drinking, right? Because we're all grown adults and we can engage in alcohol. You can go to I don't know, a concert tonight if you wanted to and you wanted to have a beer, and that's fine. You can go out have a dinner, have a glass of wine, whatever. The issue is why we are drinking. That's the main problem. And that's what people aren't getting to the bottom of. It's why we're drinking. And that's a question everyone should have an answer for. Am I drinking because I don't know, I'm drinking maybe tonight out of the whole week because I'm going out to dinner with my friends and I wanted to like engage in like, I don't know, 2 cocktails and then I'm going out dancing after? Am I going to a distillery to like have some kind of what is it? Not bourbon. Oh gosh, what's the other
Like
alcohol? Anyway,
Scotch, you mean?
okay, yeah, at a distillery, and I'm doing a tasting. That's totally different. When I am having a hard time psychologically with intrusive thoughts because of something that I experienced on the job, like the horrendous criminal sexual assault of a child that I responded to on scene, whether I was a paramedic, a fireman, or a cop, or I took that call as a dispatcher. And everything about that scene, what I heard, what I saw, what I experienced is constantly coming back up to me and playing over and over again like a video that I can't shut off. Okay. And the only way that I find I'm able to is engaging in some amount of alcohol, right? And it works because it does shut that off, and maybe it knocks me out to sleep or not, but otherwise it really does shut those intrusive thoughts out. Okay. We do find a temporary solution for that, right? That does work. However, what we're not realizing is that alcohol is a depressant, right? There's that knowledge gap. And we're not realizing that it's making the situation worse for us in the sense that later, the next day, you don't even have to be hungover, okay? You will feel worse, right? Than you did while before you took the alcohol. And so now you're going to want to throw more alcohol to achieve the same thing that you did, right? To shut that off. Now, what we don't realize is that we're creating dependence, right? Because I got to keep doing that in order to keep shutting those thoughts off. So it's how we're using alcohol as a coping mechanism versus drinking because, I don't know, it's more of like a social once in a while thing. Every day that I sit in that basement with a handle of liquor and I have to actually like up the amount of alcohol that I'm taking in, right? Because we start to build some tolerance, right? That's the issue, that I'm turning to the alcohol to deal with an issue. That's our problem. That's why alcohol is a problem. It's not so much the fact that, like, oh, you had a glass of wine or you had a couple beers with your buddies, yesterday at a party, whatever. No, it's the fact that we have these individuals that are turning to it to self-medicate, right? To cope with whatever it is that they're trying to deal with in that way, and it causes a bigger problem. Now, when people have been like completely to the point, especially when they have enough alcohol in them, that it's impairing them so badly that, there's a weapon around and all of that, absolutely. The likelihood for you making some kind of out of your mind, your judgment's impaired, you got clouded thinking, and you maybe make a decision that, yeah, we question, would the individual have done it? And I'm not saying that here's what people have to understand, and it's very crucial that they understand this. For the individuals that are taking their life by suicide, it's not like I have never thought of suicide or contemplated or had this thought run through my mind ever before. But tonight, because I was drunk and intoxicated, it happened. It doesn't work that way. The thought, the contemplating of suicide has been there at some point. For some people, it's been on and off for like a year, for months, for weeks, whatever. But it is not something that we in suicide, it definitely is not where an individual wakes up, life is great. There's never been any thought about this. You've never contemplated or even had the idea, and suddenly it just came up and you did it. It doesn't work that way. This is something that's been a long time coming. Some people contemplate on and off about it. And definitely when alcohol is involved, especially a large amount and maybe some other drugs, about within the last 12 hours of, the death, yeah, we absolutely see that it really, really has impact.
One of the startling common denominators that came out of all these conversations of people that were in crisis at one point was over and over and over again. Initially, a few of them said it, and then I kind of honed in and then would ask it after that to make sure that I pulled that from this person. When we think about how we were discussing suicide years ago, it was selfish, it was cowardly. How could you think of your family? And then you listen to these people who are actually there. And again, that brain becoming miswired through all these different contributing factors, their actual belief system, their baseline has been skewed. And you listen to them, they truly believe that they are the reason for their family's pain. My kids are scared of them. My wife hates me, whatever it is. And so now they've got that little voice saying, well, if you just took yourself out, then they'd be happier. And there's such
Right.
a tragic example in Florida. I think it was just over a year ago. We had the two young cops. They were dating and they had a baby. I think it was a little baby boy. I think he took his own life, and it was barely a week after she took her own life. And so, again, to the healthy mind, like, it makes no sense, but it shows you this
Right.
distorted belief of these people. And then you think
Yes.
about, we refer to alcohol as Dutch courage. You've got this voice saying, look, just do it because then they'll be happy. That makes, at that moment, in that, let me be clear, distorted state, it makes them,
Right.
suicide, courageous and selfless. And now you
Hmm.
add that last thing, that Dutch courage, that alcohol, and then you've got the completion of suicide. So that's what I've heard, again, observationally through hundreds of interviews. What about that factor as you've kind of unwrapped some of the suicides that you were looking into?
Absolutely. So a lot of individuals really, and I've talked to a lot of individuals who have also attempted suicide and were unsuccessful. And so going back to talk to a lot of those individuals and learning from that, you actually have the ability to kind of confirm a lot of this work, right? Like we're on the right path. And yes, this was the mindset and this is what we were finding. So kind of really, in that sense of the matter, it's very, I'm very glad that some people have been unsuccessful, absolutely, because it's so unfortunate. It takes all of that in a lot of those cases for people to realize that they can come back and they can come out of this. And I've met so many amazing people that are living their best life post an attempt that was unsuccessful. I'm happy that they're here, but I'm just so sad that they had to go through all of that. And then I'm sad for all of those families and those that were successful, and it's, you know what I mean, weren't able to see that you can, no matter how bad it is or how bad it seems, you can come out of this. One of the things that I've learned is, yeah, there is this really distorted way of thinking and this perspective that these people adopt of thinking that, you know what, my family will be better off without me. Things will be so much better. Like I'm the most horrible thing for them. It's me that needs to be removed or erased because I'm the problem. That is so unfortunate. And so as I go on and do these trainings, I'm very well aware of the fact that I have people around me that might be holding on by a thread and they're really struggling. And I really emphasize and tell them, from real live experience situations, cases of people who have attempted to take their life and are still around, luckily, to be able to confirm and tell us, like, it couldn't be further from the truth, that way of thinking. And then all those families that have lost their loved ones, and I tell people, I don't care if you have the worst possible relationship with your family, seriously, with your kids, with your significant other, like it could be the worst of the worst. I'm telling you right now, because I've sat in front of those families where it really was the worst of the worst, and the suicide has done nothing more than devastate. um it's the most horrific thing that they can experience, even if they had a bad relationship. It is just the most devastating, most horrible thing that can happen. No, they don't want you to die. They really don't. Maybe, this marriage isn't working anymore and it's really toxic and it has to end, and that's fine, but it doesn't mean that the lives have to go. It's not to that point. And I'm telling you, I've met some people who they really were going through nasty, nasty divorces. The kids didn't care for the parent, etc., and devastated, horrible. They can't come back from that. And I've talked to these families years after that suicide of their loved one, and they still are not okay. So it's something that we really need to have people understand. Like, I get that things are really rough. You may not really see it right now. You're not making the connection, but we really need to emphasize and let them know, like, this is not going to fix. It's going to make it way, way worse.
I just feel like this needs to be front and center on the posters in the conversation. If your mind is telling you, you're hearing this conversation, that you are a burden to the people that love you, that is a massive red flag. That is, your sign to be like, all right, I need to pick up the phone. I need to go see someone. I need to schedule an appointment. I just need to, go to a friend's house and physically put myself in front of them, because that is the precursor. When you really believe that, your actual reality is being distorted now. And so the things
Yeah.
that your mind is telling you are not coming from a healthy place anymore.
No. And one of the things that I have found that's really interesting about suicide is that most people actually don't want to die. That's one of the saddest parts of it all, right? In all these cases where I'm watching this unfold and I'm putting together this like storyline, if you will, like the whole just how it unraveled and everything I'm hearing. The pain that people are experiencing is so tremendous that they don't always want to die. A lot of them actually don't want to die. They just want to stop the pain. And if you can imagine the absolute, I ask people, imagine the absolute worst point of pain that you ever experienced, whatever that may be. Think about that, like physical pain. I'm talking physical pain. Um, Whatever that physical pain that was the worst of the worst, where you felt like this could possibly, I feel like I'm going to die, like for real. I can no longer handle this. That's, and that goes on and on and on for days and months and years or whatever it may be. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't agree with it, right? I don't agree with this matter of handling the situation by taking your life, but you can start to somewhat understand, and you're like, oh, this is so unfortunate that you were really in this level of pain. But you want them to understand that there really are ways that we can get through this. And I'm not going to lie, you'll have to put in the work, and it might not always be easy, but you really can. So that's the hardest part, and that's what's unfortunate. But I think as we continue to put this information out and let people really start to be able to understand and make that connection, I think that you can definitely have some more positive results.
100%.
Into like physical, altercations with people. Our head bounces off concrete all the time. I mean, it does. And because we don't see a visual injury, we oftentimes are like, I'm fine, everything's good, whatever. And it isn't until later that we start to see the behaviors, right? We're seeing behaviors that are connected to a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, but people don't know what that looks like. They don't know what that is. And that is something that really um, contributes to, again, getting into that impaired judgment, that mindset that you have a lot of very clouded thinking. Your perspective is altered. So that's another major contributor that I've been seeing, that people don't even they don't even begin to scratch the surface on talking about that.
I know in the SEAL community, the CTE conversation behind a lot of the suicides, I've had some of the widows on the show. When I think about the fire service, obviously we've got less exposure to concussive impacts and that kind of thing. But, there's a lot of us that played football. I was a martial artist
Correct.
my whole life, so got kicked and punched in the head. And, so those
Correct.
are all behind it as well. And then ironically, if you look at going back to sleep deprivation, the demyelination of the myelin sheath that you get from a TBI, the same
Yeah.
exact thing happens from sleep deprivation. So from us, it
Correct.
might be a little less kind of traumatic, like physical, but it's more physiological. We're still getting the same degradation.
Absolutely.
Going to the psych meds quickly before we transition. I had a Swedish psychiatrist on the show, and he was, kind of just amazed the way that they're prescribed over here, because what you hear from a lot of people in that industry that actually are, telling the actual data driven facts is that the efficacy of a lot of these psych meds aren't actually anywhere near as good as people would think. And that when they are used appropriately, it's supposed to be for a short amount of time as you then are diving into the psychology behind it and then wean them off. But if you look at the
Hmm.
States getting away from psychology, let's say we go into the doctor's office and got high blood pressure, they just give you blood pressure meds. They're not saying, all right, well, it's a little high now. We'll take these, beta blockers for a few weeks, but we've got to start working on your weight. We've got to get you eating better. We've got to get you moving because we want to get you off these pills. And I feel it's the same exact conversation in the mental health space when it comes to psych meds in this country is that, oh, I'm on antidepressants. Like forever? that's what they told you. Like for the next 40 years, you're going to be popping these pills. So I think that
Mhm.
that's an issue. I'm not saying that all psychiatrists are evil people, because they're not, but I think there's a very unprofessional, or uh, I don't know, just an undereducated element to the prescription of psych meds. If it's going to bridge a gap and get someone to be able to temper their emotions and get back in a gym and get to some counseling sessions, then yeah, it'd be a great adjunct. But I feel like a lot of times they're prescribed ongoing, which is never how these were ever supposed to be prescribed in the first place.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I find is, first of all, when it comes to psychotropic medications, reality is that some individuals really do need to be on them. In some cases, people don't necessarily need to be on them or not on them that long, right? Sometimes they need to be used temporarily. Um, and when I say that there's an issue with mismanagement, meaning that the individuals are not taking them, they're not taking them as they should, right? So if you have to take it once every day, um at a certain time or whatever, you really should stick to that. If you're going to come off of them, you really should speak to the doctor to have the doctor wean you off properly so that you don't run the risk of being in some kind of like psychological emergency. I often tell officers, fire, paramedics, the story of how, when we get that call where there's that individual, and we always get it, we've all had it, um, where the individual's family is calling 911 and they're saying, hey, John is bipolar, John takes medication, but John hasn't taken his medication in 2 weeks. And now John's tearing up the house and John's losing it. We need you to come and help us, right? And you show up, and sure enough, John's tore the house up. It looks like a tornado went through. Everything's broken. It's just ripped to pieces. And now John's ready to like fight you. It's just trying to get him in the ambulance to try to get him over for a psych eval. Like, this is a very like prime example of an individual who's on a psychotropic medication for a mood stabilizer. Okay. And for whatever reason, he didn't like the effects of the medication. He didn't like how it was making him feel, because that's usually the case, right? Why they stop abruptly just taking them. And they go off cold turkey, and now the symptoms of their disorder are that much more intensified. They're having maybe a psychotic episode, whatever it may be. And so this is the outcome of how these drugs need to be taken at a certain time, certain way. If you're going to be coming off of them, there's a way to do it. You can't just stop, because then it causes all kinds of issues. So imagine if that's happening to just a regular individual, a civilian of society. Absolutely, this can happen to first responders. Yeah, they're not invincible. This will happen to them too. And this is what happens, right? Um, and then sometimes they're not under the right care, right? Primary physicians, love them, they're fantastic. But if I'm going to be on something for a longer period of time, then maybe I should be referred off to a psychiatrist, because they are the ones that handle and prescribe psychotropic medications, right? Like, if I go to my primary initially because I have a problem with something and I'm not really sure like what to do or what the issue is, absolutely my primary physician will help me get to the bottom of the issue. Maybe he'll treat me for a bit, but once it becomes a little more beyond his scope of knowledge, or you just really want someone who specializes specifically in this, is what we should be doing, right? For the most part, if I have a break of a bone, I may go to my primary initially, but he'll either say, okay, yeah, looks like you might have a break, but I'm not really sure. You're going to have to go to the ER and have it x-rayed, or go see an orthopedic doctor, right? Because they specialize with bones and all of that, and breaks and so on. Same thing with a cardiologist. So why aren't we doing this with our mental health professionals? It's important that, they specialize in these psychotropic medications. There's so many different options out there for different meds for depression alone. Why wouldn't I want to maybe work with the individual that has seen so many patients and knows, like, given my situation, given my history and all that, like, they would rather maybe, try this versus this. And I think the other thing that's so important is that we need to learn to self advocate for ourselves. So you need to do the research, and you really need to know what questions to ask, what concerns you may have, and really be a part of the treatment plan, as opposed to just sitting there like a sitting duck and just, I don't know, just have someone tell you what to do and how to do it. Like, we are constantly investigating all day, every day in our jobs, even when we get home in some cases as first responders, right? Because that's part of our duty. So when it comes to your self care, you should really be learning to self advocate for yourself, which is one of the other things that I really focus on with giving another tool to our first responders for that self care.
There's a funny video that's floating around, and it's a husband and wife, and she says she's got a headache, and he's pointing out this because there's a giant metal nail sticking out of her head, and she's like, "You don't understand." And that's how I feel with this whole mental health conversation: is you keep giving them Tylenol, but you're not pulling the nail out of the head.
Right.
So when we're taking and I'm not talking about schizophrenic and bipolar. Obviously, there's some. That's where over and over again I hear, yes, medication is appropriate at that point, unless you can obviously unravel that using other modalities as well. But when it comes to depression, anxiety, some of the ones that we see most common, you're on this pill, great, but that's mitigating symptoms. Are you addressing the root cause? And if not, why not? And I think it's the same, again, going back to diabetes, hypertension. If you're just taking pills, if you're just taking insulin and not addressing the fact that your body's doing this in the first place, then again, it
Right.
goes back to that self advocacy. Why not get to that
Right.
point? Because the goal is to get off the pills. You should not be on pills if you can avoid it.
Yeah, we definitely have to do better at learning to self advocate for ourselves. And really, maybe I'm just a little bit of a weirdo, but I really like to get to the bottom of a problem. I really do, because I don't know. My mindset has always been like, maybe I overanalyze, but I want to get to the source of the issue. Like, okay, well, what's going on here? Why? Why is this happening? And learn from, like, once you're able, I mean, sometimes we may not have an answer, but at least I'm trying to get to the source of the problem, instead of just kind of like, yeah, kind of shelving it and like, yeah, well, whatever, or we're just going to go through the motions. Like, no, let's get to the bottom of to the source of the problem, to the root of it, and try to see, like, okay, now that we understand what that is, how do we proceed? Are there better ways and proceeding with making this better?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I'm the same. If you reverse engineer enough, you'll find some pretty basic things that need to be changed. Well, we talked about, symptoms and signs and all these things. Let's go to solutions. So talk to me about canine therapy and then resilient heroes.
Okay, so there have been a lot of studies out there that show how animals, and I know that you mentioned growing up, all the animals that you were around, and so there's this hormone that as human beings, we crave, right? That oxytocin, that feel good hormone, right? We get that from hugging people, having social touch, interaction, right? We've found in studies that the animals, right, interacting with the animals, we get that fix. And so a lot of individuals are seeing more and more therapy dogs out and about. And I know some people are kind of like, first and foremost, the difference between a service animal and a therapy. The service animal does a job for you, the one individual. Those are the animals that will have the vest that says, do not pet, I'm working. So they're there to provide a service to that individual. The therapy dogs, on the other hand, they're there for everyone, right? So I have Arlo, our certified trauma therapy dog, and he's a little unique. He is a 200-pound bull mastiff, and I know people are just like, what the heck? This is a horse. He's a big boy. He is great. And the animals have this impact on people, especially the dogs. And the reason why Arlo, specifically his breed, I felt was very appropriate was because he does share this commonality with first responders, military, where on the exterior, they may be just big, massive, tough looking, right? Just rough. But in the interior, they're really just gentle giants that are very loving. And so Arlo came about because I had two friends of mine who had done a couple tours of Iraq in the military, and they're police officers. And when they came back at the end of their tours, Arlo at the time was just my regular, pet at home. Um, two of these individuals, I was convinced something bad was going to happen. One of them, I was for sure convinced he's going to eat his gun. I could not leave him alone. It was very difficult to, like, not have eyes on him. Didn't know what to do because, of course, very guarded, shut down, isolated. So I had them around my house, and these were two totally different situations. And so with each situation, the first one, when this guy came around, he engaged with Arlo. And it's funny because he's so big and he's such a massive, like, breed that people are just like, I can't believe this is your dog. Like, he's so massive. They kind of like zone in on him and they start talking with like that mushy language, like, oh my God, you're so you're so big. And it made them comfortable enough that they started to open up about things that I couldn't get them to talk about. And I wasn't asking, they just, in their interaction with the dog, petting the dog, just kind of like, zoned in on the dog, they started talking and they started to unleash some information that, however it made them feel, was good enough. Whatever they felt from that was the beginning of them realizing that maybe they do need to get some help. Maybe they need to do something to feel what they're feeling from the interaction with the dog. And it was the beginning of them seeking out their resources and their therapeutic modalities that were the fit for them, and them healing. And now we can say that they are both living their best life today. So I knew I had something special with the dog, especially with the first guy, but life gets in the way. And then by the second guy, I was like, okay, I just can't ignore this. So that is the beginning of how Arlo went into training. And he is now a certified trauma therapy dog. And he goes with me to just about all, like, the trainings, conferences, all of that, through Resilient Heroes, that I can drive to because we cannot get him on a plane.
I was just going to say that. He's not a lap dog, huh?
He thinks he is. He thinks he's a Chihuahua at 200 pounds as a 6-year-old bull mastiff.
You talked about the two veterans that are also police officers. That one you were worried about is going to eat his gun. Arlo opens the door and now he goes on his own healing journey. When it comes to this whole conversation that we've had today, I think where we've failed as a profession is we've just allowed the conversation to get stuck at smash the stigma, which doesn't do anything. I mean, I get create an environment for courageous vulnerability. That's ultimately what we need. But that's just someone open up saying, I need help. It's the what's next. Where I feel like there's so much hope and yet it's so under discussed is the post-traumatic growth, is the fact, as you said, those two men are living their best life, or men or women, depending on who they are living their best life. And they then become beacons of hope for other people. And so I think, as we talked about, that unaddressed trauma from our early life and then the trauma we accumulate through our profession, when worked through, I truly believe that becomes strength. That becomes the gold glue on Japanese pottery. So talk to me about that. You've watched these metamorphoses. Talk about the hope and the kind of people that we can become when we figure out what needs to be addressed and we find our own unique toolbox to start working through the trauma.
Yeah. So with these particular two individuals and many others, and I've said this, when people actually deal with their shit, when they unpack and do the work to try to get through to get to a better place, these individuals have way better outcomes than the individuals who want to be in denial, who are afraid of the, stigma, who are in denial of something, of what they're going through, right? And trying to just look the other way, or, kind of like just brush it under the rug. There are so many different modalities out there, therapeutic modalities, that people aren't even aware of. And I think that's again, the knowledge gap. This is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, because I'm not kidding. There's just not enough information. You would think people know all of this and they really don't. And it's like, wow, just because of some lack of information, these horrible outcomes are presenting themselves. We have to do better. People think, when they think of therapy or they think of like psychology, they only think of talk therapy, right? Which is our psychotherapy. Does it work for everyone? Absolutely not. One of the things that people don't understand or don't realize is that psychology is not one size fits all, right? So what works for you may not work for me, and vice versa. So when you ask people, hey, what are options out there, all I hear is psychotherapy, talk therapy, talking with a doctor. Those are the only answers I get. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, there's such a whole world out there of information and different modalities, like that you have to actually look to see what works for you or what may not. It doesn't all work for everybody. But just talking about like EMDR, hyperbaric chambers, cold water plunges, retreats, so many different options. I mean, we can go on all day here about them. It's one of the things that we need to be talking about more. So people are, everybody didn't know what psychotherapy was for a long time. But the more we talked about it, the more you heard about it, the more people mention it, more people become more educated on the topic and they know what it is. You really can't find anyone nowadays. You say psychotherapy or talk therapy, they know what it is, but at one point they didn't all know what it was. So we need to start doing that with all the other modalities so that we can start normalizing those and like putting them out there. And it's like, oh yeah, I know what that is, or I tried it, or I didn't, whatever. And that's one of the things, again, psychoeducate. When you present information to people and different options, they they now have the ability to make a conscious decision for themselves, whether it sounds appealing or not, whether they've tried it. They can do that, right? They can turn to something. Most people just don't know what is available to them, what they can do. And so I think that that's one of the biggest things, is filling that knowledge gap. And especially when it comes to something like the world of psychology and like these different modalities, because if you don't know about it because you didn't go to school for it, or you're somehow not involved in that platform, like how do you know, right? I mean, I don't know everything about everything in life until if someone brings anything up of any topic, any subject matter that I've never heard of, until I actually have someone explain it to me or I sit down and I educate myself, I won't know, and that's fine, but have options.
I think this has been amazing. Even the world of the psychedelics, you've got MDMA, you've got ketamine, you've got, ibogaine, you've got, ayahuasca. So even that, I've just had two firefighters message me. They were at a psychedelic retreat through the Siren Project, which is a nonprofit that puts first responders through. And they literally had a complete revelation. And these are men that have already put in the work. And I think this is important when you have, treatment resistant depression or some of the associated struggles. Maybe that's the key to the lock that opens a door. And it's not a magic bullet, but maybe that will be the aha moment for you. And then you kind of find that pea beneath the mattress, as we say. So the hope in this massive toolbox, from equine therapy to ayahuasca and everything in between, I think that's what we need to be shouting from the rooftops as well, is get people to understand that they're
Exactly.
struggling, but give them the hope. Like, okay, you tried this counselor, it didn't work. Have you tried a different
Right.
human being, another counselor? Maybe you'll have the right connection. Maybe an MDMA or something else will open the door, and then you go back to the right counselor, and now all of a sudden you're unpacking this stuff. So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, it's the hope element, I think, is what we need to put in now, so people are excited to find out who they can be when they do the work.
Yep, absolutely. Giving them resources and giving them options is really what we need to put at the forefront.
100%. All right. Well, before we wrap up, expand on what you offer with Resilient Heroes.
So, Resilient Heroes is a nonprofit that I started due to all of this work. As I had conducted all these autopsies and I found like what I felt was missing, what we are needing, I decided to put curriculum together. And now it's important to understand that as first responders, like we go through training, and a lot of it sometimes we don't care about. We don't want to be there, where we have to just complete some of this stuff. Some training is great. However, one thing that I have found throughout my years as an officer and a lot of fellow first responders that sit in that trainee seat is that we oftentimes actually have a lot of people that come in and provide us these like trainings or whatnot, and the delivery is just awful,
Mm-hmm.
right? It may be great material, it may be great, but again, not understanding the culture of our work, and how to deliver the information that they're trying to deliver in a way that we'll understand it, that will resonate with us, is one of the pieces I found that's missing. And so for me, it was very important not just to put together some other, just another training, another curriculum that, just really doesn't go anywhere. It was important on how it's designed, right? So this curriculum was designed to really make it a very interactive um, group setting way of learning, where I'm not going to it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. We've had enough of that. It's very much talking about all these important pieces of information from an educational standpoint and knowledge that we want to give to the first responders, but you do it in a way where we do it through a lot of lived experiences, if you will. So we understand, right? I have worn the hat for 21 years as a police officer. They also bring the psychological experience. And so combining those two and really just presenting it in a way and all of the information that really fits, especially within our population, is important. So I essentially am providing, everything along lines of the trauma, the suicide, the resources, all those different treatment modalities that are options, how to advocate for yourself. All of that information is being presented, and it's really incredible to see how it's impacting individuals, right? So I really focus on impact metrics and really trying to see, what's working, what's not. How do we need to what changes do we need to make? What do we need to add to really have people take this information, not only have it resonate with them, but have them actually start applying all of this um, and have an extra set of tools in their toolbox for them to have better outcomes, right? And this is the way that we start to show individuals that if you take care of this, if you start to have knowledge on a lot of this information, and you're able to apply it in your own world, in your own life, on your job, in your personal lives, etc., this will start reducing the likelihood of crisis, right? And when you reduce the likelihood of crisis, right, you're getting ahead of everything. We're doing a proactive approach. Then you start reducing suicidal ideation. And so that's really what I've been going around the country doing with different agencies. I was just in Denver last week. It was an amazing outcome. I've done tons of stuff here in the state. Next week, I'll be about an hour away from Chicago, downstate. And it's really just presenting to different agencies. The reason I started the not-for-profit is that, unfortunately, a lot of our agencies across the country, there's a budget, finances are an issue. They really focus on getting us the training that is mandated by the state and that we absolutely have to get done. And that's really a lot of our policy and all of that. But when it comes to doing trainings like this and stuff that's for us, ourselves, for our own self-care, right? It's kind of like, oh, well, we don't have any funding for that anymore. We've run out. We don't have it. It's not in the budget. So Resilient Heroes nonprofit is to really be able to get this information, the psychoeducation training out to agencies, regardless of budget, finance issues. They don't have to pay for it. I started the not-for-profit so that through grants, donations, fundraising, we can get these tools that we need to get out to our first responders. And then now we don't have an excuse. It is a data-driven analysis, curriculum. So really, it's I tell leadership and different agencies, if you really do care about the suicide issue and the trauma issue of your agencies with your members, and so now if money's not an issue and you really do care, then what's the excuse now? So yeah, Resilient Heroes. If anyone is interested in helping us with this mission, you can go to the website, www.resilient-heroes.com. All the information is there. I constantly put out a weekly newsletter to let people know what we're doing, what's happening, a lot of discussion around all of this work. I send that out to people, so you can absolutely subscribe, and you can make a donation if you in some way or another want to help with this mission.
Fantastic. Well, Liz, I want to thank you so much. I mean, it's been such a unique perspective with you having a full career in law enforcement and the psychology side, and especially the kind of, the autopsy element to all these suicides. I mean, it's a completely different conversation I've had with anyone else. So, and then on top of that, obviously what you're doing from the nonprofit, it's so endearing. So many people that already serve that then go above and beyond and serve, yet again. So I want to thank you so, so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work that you do, for putting so much information out on so many different amazing topics. I appreciate you. And please be safe.